They say all good things must come to an end, although they also say that no man is an island. Yet there is literally an island called the Isle of Man, which I've been to, so I'm not actually sure what to believe. But in the context of the Cruis'n series for the Nintendo 64, that first statement rings true. Because let me tell you, this series is indeed a good thing. As I said before, I really wish that I hadn't listened to the critics when they gave such a mauling to both Cruis'n USA and Cruis'n World. Even though I have now played through both of them and thoroughly enjoyed both of them, I feel a shred of guilt that I denied the younger me those games that he would have absolutely loved. A younger me who loved Outrun, Road Rash, Daytona USA, Ridge Racer. The Cruis'n games would have been right up my street. But I was too insistent in my foolish, misguided belief that gaming journalists were experts who were always right, to actually try them for myself. And for that, little EHD, I'm really sorry. But with that said, we arrive at the final chapter in the N64 Cruis'n series. The difficult third act. The age-old challenge and entertainment of keeping what's made the first two instalments special, while also trying to go that extra mile to end the trilogy on a high. Some third acts succeed. Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, Star Wars Return of the Jedi, Halo 3, Super Mario Bros. 3. Some of them are, frankly, absolute dog shit. Stuff like RoboCop 3, The Godfather 3, Mass Effect 3, and Dead Space 3. The final part of a trilogy is always tough to call, but this, my friends, is the closing act of the Cruis'n trilogy. This is Cruis'n Exotica. Now, if you've been with me from the start on this retrospective journey through the strange and wonderful world of the Cruis'n games, you'll be well aware of the criticisms that the late 90s gaming journalists threw at the N64 ports. Complaints about the handling, the longevity, the difficulty, the censorship, the graphics, the controls, the popping, the music, the variety, the value, the car models, the track design, the frame rate, the collision detection, the fog, the simplicity, the multiplayer, the replay value, the absurdity. All those things the expert gaming journalists told you were wrong about the game. And yet, in spite of their insistence that these games were not worth your time nor your money, it seems that many gamers decided that actually it was worth both their time and their money. They went all Rage Against the Machine and fucking bought it anyway. Cruis'n World clearly did well enough in the arcades for Midway to greenlight a sequel, and the N64 port clearly sold well enough to greenlight a port of the new cabinet. And sometime around late 1999 to early 2000, the new game made its debut in the arcade. Midway had already based the first game in the USA, and the second game around the world. But thankfully, rather than going completely off the rails and going for Cruis'n Galaxy or Cruis'n Universe, they at least kept the game grounded on Earth, mostly, and opted for Cruis'n Exotica. A host of new tracks in glamorous new locations, including Hong Kong, Las Vegas, Tibet, and Ireland. And while I may mock, the Island track is actually one of the best in the game in my opinion. Mixed in with these real world locations are a couple of exotic tracks. The lost city of Atlantis, where you race literally on the seabed. The Amazon jungle, complete with dinosaurs running along the track and pterodactyls taking a shit on your windscreen. As well as a final race through a seemingly semi-colonised Mars. Whereas Cruis'n USA and Cruis'n World were both built on the Midway V-Unit chip, you know, the one they branded as the Ultra 64 system, when in fact it had basically no relationship at all to what the Nintendo 64 would eventually become. Cruis'n World was built on the new Midway Zeus 2 chipset, and as you can see from the footage, the game looks and runs... yeah, I'm not really sure either. Because despite the incredible minds behind MAME building emulators for hundreds and hundreds of different arcade boards, chipsets and the like, the Zeus 2 chip has never been emulated. You see, there were only actually ever 2 games released on it. Cruis'n Exotica and a third-person Smash TV-inspired deathmatch game called The Grid. Emulating an entire chipset is, I imagine, quite an undertaking. And when there's only 2 games that ever ran on it, you can kind of see why nobody has taken the effort to do it. And while those brilliant minds behind MAME are seemingly working on emulating every fucking pachinko machine in Japan right now, I can't see it happening anytime soon either. So while there are Cruis'n Exotica ROMs that will launch on MAME, all of them have a bunch of issues with collision detection, with missing textures, missing roads, and a host of crashes. So we're not going to have to worry about comparing the N64 version to the arcade, and we're just going to have to work with what we've got. So Cruis'n Exotica very much takes the approach of, if it isn't broke, don't try to fix it. From the moment you boot the game up and hear the title music, it's instantly a cruising game. The main premise of the game remains exactly the same. It's a point-to-point racer featuring a time limit which you can extend by passing checkpoints. It's you against 7 other AI-controlled cars in a race to the finish line, where the only objective is to finish first. The main game mode is a replica of the arcade experience. This time you start out with just 2 continues, which you'll burn through every time you finish a race anywhere other than first. And all of those things that I mentioned about previous cruising games basically apply here too. Yes, I am fully aware that the controls are more sensitive than a millennial being forced to look at Twitter. Yes, I'm fully aware that the game is about as long as an episode of Bluey. And yes, I am fully aware that the collision detection is still bastard unfair at times. I know all this stuff, but none of this stuff stops the game from being an absolute blast to play. It's undeniably a cruising game, and if you've played either of the others, you'll be instantly at home here too. So what has changed with Exotica? Well, the trick system introduced in Cruis'n World is back, and while I lamented the almost pointless boost mechanic in that one, Exotica actually finds a way to make use of it. Now, by boosting on the approach to a ramp or a sharp change in the incline of the terrain, double tapping the accelerator to boost now performs a super flip. As well as looking completely fucking ridiculous, but in a good way, these super flips are actually incredibly useful if, like me, you like competing against your own times. You see, every time you perform a super flip, it will take 1 whole second off your total race time. So for example, if you finish a course in 1 minute and 40 seconds, and you perform 5 super flips in the race, your final time will be reduced to 1 minute 35 seconds. It's a novel idea, I grant you, but it makes those moments matter. Choosing between a shortcut that might save you a second, or doing a super flip that will save you a second. If you're leaderboard competitive, it makes you think and play a little bit differently, which I always find to be a good thing in any game. There is another way to do a super flip though, and this one is a bit of a game breaker. Whereas in previous cruising games, your race times and finishing position could easily be scuppered because you inadvertently ploughed into an oncoming car that you didn't see coming around the fucking corner, Cruis'n Exotica has a solution for that. By performing a double tap accelerator boost, you can now hit any oncoming vehicle and super flip over them, which essentially makes the oncoming traffic, by far the biggest obstacle in the game, essentially powerless. Similarly, if the aggressive AI is moving across to ram you, performing a boost will let you super flip over them too. Now on the plus side, this adds an entirely new way to play. Less focus on mastering the courses and driving perfectly, more emphasis on trying to super jump at every given opportunity to keep shaving seconds off your race time. The downside though, is that it makes the game painfully easy. I mean look, cruising games aren't all that hard. Cruis'n World was definitely more challenging than USA, but it never felt all that difficult. Exotica, on the other hand, is an absolute cinch. Because there's no limit on how many times you can perform that boost. You can essentially boost your way out of every situation. Tight corner on the crest of a hill? Nah, just boost it. Enemy AI about to ram you into an oncoming car? Nah, boost it. Colossal accident in front of you? Nah, just boost it. Honestly, it became such second nature, I found myself purposefully trying not to use it as I felt like I was cheesing the game somehow. Away from the tricks in the arcade mode, there's also a freestyle mode where you can select any of the tracks from the main Cruis'n Exotica mode to play a single race on. There's also challenge mode where all 12 stages from the main mode each have 4 different track variations to the arcade. 2 new point-to-point races, a circuit mode, as well as a drag race. So basically there's 60 tracks in the game. And there's a load of hidden cars that you earn as you rack up the miles. Like previous games, there's little, if any, difference between any of the cars. They're basically just skins. Some of them are quite unique, the forklift truck for example. Add in the multiplayer mode for up to 4 players, and there's plenty of content again to keep you going. Graphically, you probably know what to expect by this point. After Cruis'n World did a much better job with draw distance objects using the fog technique, Exotica goes back to the Cruis'n USA system of fucking horrendous pop-in. I mean, look, admittedly I have slowed this down to make a point, but here I am casually driving along Mars and where the fuck did this massive structure come from? Or, you know, just thrashing my car casually under the sea discovering the lost city of Atlantis and oh my fucking god, there's a massive whale out of nowhere! The pop-in is incredibly jarring and really fucking distracting at times. Having said that, I do feel like the frame rate is way more solid on Exotica, so it does feel slightly smoother than the previous entries. While good old Bill Clinton in the hot tub does appear in the Exotica arcade, only this time he's flanked to the left by a brunette bikini girl, which I am absolutely certain is 100% not a reference to Monica Lewinsky. But there's not even a hint of that on the N64 version. Instead, at the end, you're treated to a 20-odd second rendition of Ride of the Valkyries, while a bikini model thrusts a trophy in your face, before some really rather trippy cruise sequence within the credits. Cruis'n Exotica released exclusively in North America on the N64, so PAL and European owners never actually got to experience it. There was a Game Boy Color version of Cruis'n Exotica, which I must say actually looks really decent for a Game Boy game, though the game itself is really shit, lacking any kind of the personality we've come to expect from the cruising games. At this point, I've got to say that I did enjoy Cruis'n Exotica. It's still very much a cruising game, and if you're a fan of the series, there's a lot of comfort to be found here. But having played all 3 cruising games in a matter of a few weeks, interspersed only with a playthrough of Michael Jackson's Moonwalker to break them up, I kind of felt a bit burnt out with Exotica. There's elements that I liked, especially the track design. There's a lot more shortcuts to discover than in previous games, and the tracks are rarely like real roads, instead using inclines and twists to make it almost feel like you're driving on a roller coaster. There's a reasonable variety in the tracks and the locations, and I did have a lot of fun playing it, but to be honest, I just can't see myself putting in as many hours on this as I did with Cruis'n USA and Cruis'n World. I guess it's time to rank the Cruis'n series on the N64 from best to worst. Again, a little caveat here, all 3 of them are worth playing, if you like arcade-style point-to-point racing games. I'm not saying that these are the best N64 racing games, in fact, far from it, but it is a genuinely fun set of games to play. However, this isn't a fucking school sports day where they all get a gold medal just for taking part, so here is the official Eternal EHD declaration of the rankings of the Cruis'n trilogy for the Nintendo 64 from worst to best. Coming up in the rear, Cruis'n Exotica. It's still a good game, but it's just so ridiculously easy and brings so little new to the table that this is probably my least favourite of the 3. Second place, Cruis'n USA. Look, I battled long and hard with this choice. I've opted for Cruis'n USA as the second best. It's great, and I really enjoyed it, even though I was sure I wasn't going to. But in all honesty, there is a deserving winner. First place goes to Cruis'n World. Cruis'n World was the one that I spent the most time with. It was the one that I felt you actually needed to get half decent at in order to finish it. It was the closest one to the arcades, it had the best music, I think it had the best graphics, and it certainly had the best content. So in my humble opinion, if you're only going to play one cruising game on the Nintendo 64, play Cruis'n World. As for Cruis'n Exotica, in trilogy terms, it's probably somewhere around Lord of the Rings. It's everything you expect it to be, it does it all perfectly well, but it just doesn't quite strike the chord that you want it to. As always, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the Cruis'n series, and which one is your favourite? How does Cruis'n rank against a plethora of other N64 racing games in your eyes? I want to know in the comments below. And if there's another retro game you want me to give the retrospective treatment to, let me know and I might just make it. Thanks again for watching, I'd be super grateful if you drop the video a like, and please do consider subscribing to the channel if you have any interest in video games. Until next time, be awesome to each other, and I unconditionally love your hecking faces.